Hello, I'm John Poitevin. I am the founder and principal of Great Catholic Parishes, and I'm so glad that you're joining me today for our webinar, Communication That Connects. You know, we all communicate, but we don't always connect. And really, that's our goal. We're communicating because we have a message, we have a dream that we have for people, a desire, something that we want for them or we want them to be a part of. But a lot of times our communications are missed, especially in the busy world today where there's so many different forms of communication. What's the best way to connect with people? Not just the best method, but what's the best approach? How we communicate, what we say is as or more important than the method or the means that we're using. So before we get into that, I want to give you just a few things, overviews here. One is that, I encourage you to check out the Great Catholic Parishes website, greatcatholicparishes.org, and see what we offer. We have these webinars. We do workshops on site at parishes. We do cohorts with parishes, and I do consulting individually with parishes. So would love for you to check that out. And also be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because all these webinars are archived there and they're all free. Some of the ones we've done so far this year are Growing as a Great Leader with Rob Murray. Encourage you to check that out. If you want to be encouraged as a leader and inspired, look into that one. Multiplying Great Leaders, The Art of Leading Change, Caring for Staff and Volunteers, Learning from Protestant Churches, and Learning from Great Entrepreneurs. Those are the ones we've done so far this year. All right, with that said, let's get into it. Communication that connects. My guest today is Emily Ricci. Emily is with Gloriam Marketing up in New York. I was just up your way near Poughkeepsie. I'm so glad that you joined us today, Emily. I found Emily's work and her business. I really don't know how I found it. I somehow ended up on her email list, and it was one of those that I was glad that I ended up on it. Like the content that she sends to me is interesting. She's great at what I would call content marketing, just not even just blogs, but just thoughts, things that provoke my interest. I just don't feel like she's trying to sell to me all the time. And that's what she's great at. She consults small businesses, parishes, dioceses. She is a distinctly Catholic marketer, unapologetically. Emily, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, John. Looking forward to chatting.
Great. Well, let's just start by asking, how did you get into this world of Catholic marketing? It is a niche or a niche. I'm not sure which one of those it is, but it's a special work. Tell us how you got interested in it and how you've given your life's work to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out in parish work when I started volunteering for my parish when I was 8. And then I started working there when I was 14, and I worked there for about 8 years, doing all the things, wearing all the hats, youth ministry, event planning, ministry coordination, faith formation, all the things. I like to joke that I've basically done all the things in the church except for like be a priest and say mass. Anything else I've probably had some experience in. And as I was leaving that position to move, my husband and I were moving up to this area, and I was leaving that position, I was thinking about all the things that I had done in parish work and really just trying to figure out what the next step was going to be for me. And it was a chance conversation in the sacristy with the pastor at the time. He knew that I was interested in marketing and I was trying to find a marketing job. And I was like, but it needs to be something that I feel passionate about. I can't just go and market for a company that I don't really have an interest in. And he was like, well, when you think about it, marketing is really just like evangelization, right? You're just evangelizing for another company. And to say that my mind was blown is an understatement, as all these things started to come together. And I realized that, yes, Catholic marketing is literally just evangelization. It's just the word that we've come up with as a church because it makes us feel better. Sounds less salesy. But we are selling the greatest product, if you will, in the world of eternal salvation. And yet we do a pretty terrible job at it. We don't necessarily do a great job of telling people about the benefits that they can receive. So that's kind of the long-winded way of saying that I found, just this area where I felt that the church as a whole could really use some help. And I have a background in communications and marketing that I was able to pair all of those together and bring in some nerdy Catholic biblical marketing and all of that together to create, as you said, either a niche or a niche. Nobody can figure it out. It's okay.
Well, it's interesting you say that about like the language that we use and how things can seem. My last webinar was called What We Can Learn from Great Entrepreneurs. And people just can be even turned off by that concept. But when you look at in marketing, they have what's called a marketing funnel or a sales funnel, which is like you start with some basic steps for people to be involved or become aware of your product, and then you engage them on a deeper level. And when someone who's just a potential customer becomes a customer, the term they use for that is conversion.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yep.
you converted a new client. So we shouldn't be that unfamiliar with that space. You use this phrase on your website, and I encourage everyone to check out your website, market like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, even that phrase may be offensive to some people, right?
Absolutely.
But tell us what you mean by market like Jesus.
Absolutely. So I'll start it off by telling a story, as you mentioned. This is one of my favorite things to do. So I have a master's degree in theology, and I am a huge Bible studies nerd, and I absolutely love doing exegetical biblical studies. If you don't know what that is, essentially you're going line by line and you're going so deep into what every single particular word meant and how Jesus meant and what's the spiritual sense, all these things. And so one night I was like, you know what? I wonder if there's anything in the Bible about marketing. Like, can I do some research on this? And I sat down the very first night at our kitchen island and I start going through. And within a couple of minutes, I was bawling my eyes out because I realized that there was a huge fantastic connection to marketing in the Bible that I'd never discovered before. And that just set me on this whole research project to try to see. Come to find out, I would say probably at least 80 to 90% of the marketing strategies we use today, Jesus and the apostles used to grow the early church. We just call them different things, and they have maybe more of an antiquated versus a digital aspect to them now. But really, all these things that we're doing, target audience and rule of seven and customer journey and all these things, you can find examples of Jesus doing this in the Bible. And so I hope, and my goal in my mission is to help churches and small Catholic businesses to recognize marketing can actually be a holy part of your calling. It can be part of God's call. If God has called you to this mission work, He's also called you to spread the gospel, which includes some marketing, and it doesn't have to be scary.
That is so good. And somebody needed to hear that because maybe they feel a little icky about marketing and promotions. And really, great marketing is just great communication that connects with people, right? And Jesus was great at communicating and connecting with people. If he was with farmers, he told a story about sowing and reaping and the harvest. And with fishermen, he talked about the fish in the ocean. And that's a lot of what we do. You alluded at the introduction of we don't always do the best job of communicating and marketing and advertising. And you use this analogy of the beauty of the church versus our communication attempts. Will you share that with everybody? Because I think it really resonates.
Absolutely, yeah. So I want you to imagine that you've walked into a beautiful cathedral or basilica. There's the tall, beautiful walls, and the stained glass and the light coming through everywhere, and beautiful, sacred art all around. You can, hear and smell the smells and bells, right? The incense and all of that, and you're having just this beautiful, exalted experience that's literally lifting your heart and your eyes up to God, right? And then you happen to look down and you catch a glimpse of the bulletin. I'm going to guess that your beautiful, magnificent moment came to a screeching halt when you looked at the bulletin. right? And what I want, what I would love to see from the church is that you look down at the bulletin or you see an email or you see an ad from a church and you have that same beautiful, exalted experience that continues to draw you into the story. Because if we can't draw them into the story, we're not going to draw them into our churches.
That is so good. I used to work in the music industry, and there's kind of a rule of thumb we had, and that is if it's not inspiring me as I'm creating it, it's probably not going to inspire someone else when they listen to it later. And I would say those of you that are in communications, when you look at what you're doing, whether it be your website or a mailer or email or anything, if you don't feel inspired by what you're creating, it's likely that the other people receiving it are not. And we're not just about getting out information, we're about inspiring people to take action on something, right? So I love that. I think that's an analogy we can all like resonate with. um, Talk a little bit more. You talked there a little bit about feeling,
Mhm.
and um, I think a lot of times we don't associate communications with feeling or provoking feelings in people. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so there's a common catchphrase in the industry that facts tell and feelings sell, right? I would say most of the decisions that you've made, most of the things the advertisements that you've seen that you've taken an action on are not because they are marketing what they're doing, but they're marketing why they're doing it, right? When we can cut through that noise, there's a stat out there that I don't know how accurate it is, but it says that we see up to 10,000 advertisements a day. As a person, we see 10,000 advertisements a day. And so we have to cut through a lot of noise, a lot of distraction. And I would say maybe 9,500 out of those 10,000 are trying to sell you to buy something, right? They want your money. Where we can stand out as churches is that, well, yes, we may need donations down the line, right? In the beginning, when we're first encountering somebody, we are trying to offer them something, right, that will completely change their lives. And all they have to do is show up. Right. And so what we have to start thinking about is what is the story? What are the feelings that that person is experiencing that's going to take them from being outside of your church to inside of your church? And if we can show them that they are known, that their experiences are known, they're a lot more likely to come inside because most people who are not coming into your churches are looking at them and thinking, I don't belong there, right? I have a past, I'm a sinner, I don't agree with teachings, whatever it is, they think that the church is not for them. And so our job is to see where they are, call them out on that, right? Not in like a we're calling them out on it, right? But show them that we recognize their story, right? That we understand them and say, yes, and you're still welcome, right? And that's what's going to translate into that. So we can tell people, hey, we're a Catholic church and that's going to do nothing. But if we see somebody in their pain and we're able to show them how the church is the solution to that pain, or really Jesus is the solution to that pain, they're a lot more likely to come inside.
That's great. So like empathize, connect with people, resonate. Like, yeah, I love it when someone does an announcement and they start with their own skepticism. Like,
Mhm.
hey, before I went in this retreat, I thought those are people that are too holy for me. I'd never fit in. I don't have time. And as parishioners are listening to that, they're going, "Oh yeah, I've thought those things." Right. So
Mhm.
I think that's great. What facts tell, feelings sell. I already got my money's worth out of this webinar because anyone who's listened to me knows I'm all about the why, the why, the why. I've probably played Simon Sinek's video 1,000 times. Um, Facts tell, feelings sell. I love that. There's also a strategic part of communications
Mhm.
that we will do so much better if we plan ahead. We have a strategy. Another thing I picked up from your blog, which I encourage people to read your blogs, was you use this analogy of GPS regarding
Mhm.
strategy. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that you're about to set off on a trip. Maybe, those of us who are here are not at the Eucharistic Congress currently, but pretend you're off to the Eucharistic Congress, right? And from wherever you are in the world, and you're like, you know what? I just believe that the Holy Spirit is going to lead me exactly where I need to go. And you just set off and you drive and you've done all the things, right? You've gotten your snacks, you've picked out your playlist. The ride's going to be great. But if you haven't planned the route, you could end up on the complete opposite side of the country, right? We have to know where we're going and how we're going to get there, even more so than the snacks and the playlist and all those extra things, right? So when I say the snack and the playlist, I'm meaning like we're talking about, oh, well, do my social media graphics look pretty? Right? Or, oh, should I be on this channel, or should I start a YouTube, or should we have a podcast, or what do these things look like? Right? Those are all important things. But if you don't know where you're going or how long it's going to take, you're either going to have a really short or a really long playlist, or you're going to run out of snacks in like the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? And so we need to know where we're headed and how we're going to get there for those other things to actually be effective.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I often tell parishes is, if your goal is nothing in particular, that's exactly what you'll accomplish. And I'm all about planning strategically, breaking down all the small steps between here and where you want to get, assigning them to people, having due dates, accountability, all of that. Can you just give us some basic steps to starting a strategy? Let's say, let's pick out something we're going to be doing in the fall. You pick out anything we're going to be doing in the fall and give us kind of some basic steps to creating a strategy around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, before I even do that, people sometimes you might hear a strategy, right? And you're like, oh, that sounds too salesy, right? Or that sounds too like we're trying to manipulate people. But I want you to put yourself in the apostles' shoes, right? Jesus at the Great Commission didn't say, hey, go out and just start preaching the gospel everywhere, right? He said, you're going to start in Judea and then Samaria and then to the ends of the earth. He gave them very specific points along that journey, right? And this is how you can see where the apostles went, right? When you read the Bible, you're like, why would Paul and Barnabas go there? That doesn't make sense. Well, it's because they just had a connection in the previous town who told them to go there to talk to their family member and so on and so forth, right? So it might not always seem like the holy thing to do, right? I'm not saying we don't trust in the Lord. We don't give him the flexibility to be able to change our plans, right? But we start out with him, discerning with him, Lord, where do you want us to go? Who do you want us to reach? Okay, so something in the fall, I am really passionate about like RCIA programs, right? So you might be starting up your RCIA, OCIA program again for the fall. You're welcoming in a new cohort, right? So we should just come up with some basic guidelines of what we're looking to accomplish, right? So let's say you had 3 people who came through last year. So could we up that number to maybe we want to try to get 5, 6, right? Let's see what kind of numbers that we're looking for. But then I want you to get a little bit deeper with that. Who specifically would you be doing like a happy dance over if you got these kinds of people in? So do you want more people who need baptism and communion and confirmation and they're like all the way, we've never considered Christianity before, right? Do you have the teachers to be able to back that up? Or are you looking for people who might already be participating in your parish, but they just haven't completed all their sacraments? You're trying to get them across the finish line, so to speak. Right? So really getting clear on who it is that you're trying to serve. Now, we don't do that because we're going to say, oh, Susie, well, we're really just trying to look for people who are only need confirmation because you need communion too. No, we're not serving you. Of course, we're not going to say that, right? But what that allows us to do is to get to the feelings, right? So now we can say, well, that person who, again, we'll just use for the sake of example, we'll use the person who only needs confirmation, right? They're already kind of involved, right? Maybe their kids have gone through the sacraments and they just need to complete their sacraments. What are they thinking about? What are their motivations for completing the sacraments, right? Do they have personal faith, right? Or is this something that they've just been going through the motions? But we can also assume that because of that, they probably have at least some baseline knowledge, right? So we get really clear about who it is that we want to draw in, and then we're just going to work backwards, right? So what is the thought or the feeling or the circumstance that they're going through right before they decide, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to go through RCIA this year? What is it that they're feeling and experiencing right before that? Right? So maybe it's they have a student in 2nd grade who's going to be making their first communion this year, and they're signing them up for religious ed. They're like, oh, you know what? I never made my first communion. I've never made my confirmation. My child's about to, right? Well, that tells us, maybe at religious ed registration, we should have some information about people who want to complete their sacraments. Right? So we can start to plot out these points, right? Okay, if we're going to start in September, right? pretty much right around now is when you want to be starting to integrate some of that into the bulletin. You want to be making sure that those things are present at registration. If you're going to have a parish fair or parish festival or something like that, that you have an information table there, right? So this gives us, we kind of start with our starting point. When do we want to accomplish this? And who are we trying to reach? What is the step right before they're making that decision? And how can we reach them with communications at that point?
So let me just kind of bullet point that.
Yep.
Like, obviously, like think about what we're going to promote, when it is, plan far enough out in advance. Like it sounded like maybe you're like 4 to 6 months in advance, even, right?
Yeah, I think you could be doing your planning and starting to kind of tease those things out, but you'll start to see communications ramping up 4 to 6 weeks right
Yeah.
before an initiative.
But as you're strategizing, like I think one mistake we make is like we'll start thinking about promoting an Advent uh program or something. Like we'll start in November. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, July, you need to be having planning meetings for Advent, right?
Yes. Yep.
So think about what you're going to promote, define your audience, and this doesn't limit it who can take part, but it just helps you be a little more targeted.
Mhm.
Create kind of a persona of the person that you're trying to reach. Like, how would you say, like, brainstorm, like, who is this person? Do we know people like this in our parish? Or do we
Absolutely.
know people like that who've gone through our CIA that we could use them to help announce it or something, right?
Exactly. Use them for testimonials and ask them, what were you thinking about right before? What made you decide to join RCIA? Right. And you can kind of get that market research from them.
Yeah. So we're trying to get inside the heart and the mind of the person we're trying to reach. And then we create a strategy around that.
Mhm.
And that's bigger work, which they might want to call you to get help with, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, thinking through how far in advance, it's always a question that I get is like, how far in advance should you start promoting something,
Mhm.
right? And yes, I think that the sooner the better is always the best case. But I also don't want you to limit yourselves. If you think of something in November for your Advent campaign, don't be afraid to run with it, right? And just try it as a trial run and put the note in your calendar for July next year, right? Because I see that all the time in parish communications is we get to this point, we say, oh, well, it's too late. We'll do it next year. And trust me, you will not do it next year, right? So do mini version now, and then we're going to do the larger version later. But yes, absolutely. The sooner, the farther ahead you can plan, the better the execution and the effectiveness is going to be.
Yeah, we can't rewind the clock, but if you're watching this right now, why don't you put a note in your calendar for July 17th, 2025? Let's start talking about Advent,
Mhm.
or RCIA or whatever.
Yep.
That's something you can work towards next year. Tell me about the importance of, so we talked about that strategy, but like you said, the content is important also.
Mhm.
And something that I think is important with parishes, or a mistake I see them make a lot, is just there's so much inconsistency. It seems like everybody has the freedom to promote their thing and make their flyer and put it up wherever they want to. And to be frank, most people are not great at this. And they're not aware that they're not great at it.
Mhm.
And so our marketing can kind of just look like this mishmash of photocopied things. How do you get a handle? How important is consistency? And then how do you get a handle on that?
Oh, it's very important, right? I joke that looking through the bulletin should not be like looking through a catalog of different fonts that you can use, right? Where every single ministry has decided this is the font that we're going to use, right? And I totally get it. I used to be the bulletin person, right? For many, many years. There are the days where it's just this is what I've got and I'm putting it in and I'm moving on, right? But what really, really helps, what I would highly advise is creating a brand guide for your parish. So this would involve coming up with what are your parish colors, right? These are the colors that we're going to use. What are the parish fonts? And these are the fonts that we're going to use, right? And not like 10 of them. We're talking about maybe two or three tops that are going to be your parish fonts, right? A few colors that you're going to use typically related to your logo, right? And what is the general feel that people should have when they read your communications, right? So if you read any of my newsletters, you will know very quickly that I am not a very formal person. I am very real. I am just going to lay it out how it is. I'm a mom with two toddlers. I don't have time to put on a facade. That you're getting what you get, right? That is my brand style. However, right, that's not necessarily going to be your parish's brand style. So do you want a more formal language? Do you want something that's more relatable? Do you want something that might even be kind of edgy or funny, right? Figure out what you want people to feel, what you want to communicate just based on the words that you use. So you want to look at your fonts, your colors, and your language. Having this in a document as a one-page thing that you can give out to anybody in any ministry or any staff member will work wonders. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to follow it, but you have a guide that you can go back to and say, actually, these are our brand standards. And so I'm going to adjust your advertisement like this, right? Having it in writing in something that you can give out to folks will help you in establishing that credibility and to be able to keep your consistency.
Yeah, and I just as I can hear the people that are watching this, I can hear what they're thinking, and they're like, "Oh, that's going to upset people if we limit who can do it." And well, Betty's done that forever in 20 years, and we can't. Yes, folks, if you've watched me before, ever before, if you make anything better, you're going to upset people. You are. People have entitlement, and they've been doing things, and you will never get better at anything if your primary concern is not upsetting people. So you got to make a decision there to start with, but you also got to walk people through it and say, here's why we're doing this, and here's some tools to help you be more consistent in it. Now, one thing I've seen people use a lot is Canva, because you can create a brand guide within your profile on Canva where people are only allowed to use certain fonts and colors.
Yep.
Uh, how do you feel about that? And are there any other resources you recommend for that?
Yeah, Canva is definitely the one that I see used the most often, and it's the most user friendly, right? Most people can do that. And I think too, it's about designating somebody who is the person, right? Even if they don't have a communications title, right? But the person who is most likely going to be doing the bulletin or the email newsletter or social media, who is kind of the person who has some of that ability to be able to tweak things, right? And the way I used to phrase it when I was working with parishes is that you're trying to make other people's job easier, right? So I would email ahead of time to the ministry leader of, hey, I see that you have this event coming up. Can you tell me just send me a couple bullet points. I don't need a whole paragraph. Just send me a couple bullet points about what it's going to be. I would take those bullet points and then translate it into something that would look and feel like the rest of the parish communication, right? So it's typically helpful if you have somebody who's kind of the person who's in charge of that, who can then do some of that liaison work. And again, in some ways, you're just marketing to your volunteers, right? And so we have to think about, what is their problem? Their problem is they really want people to come to their event, but they don't know how to make that happen, right? And you do, right? And so you can go to them and say, hey, I know that this is going to help increase event attendance, and I want to take some things off of your plate because we appreciate you so much as a volunteer, right? We just have to, again, it's all of marketing, all of communications is just putting yourself in the other person's shoes and figuring out how what you're doing is helping them.
Yeah, and that's helping them do it better. And
Mhm.
as you said, if you can have one person that is kind of I don't like gatekeepers in the church, but I definitely like a communications gatekeeper who everything runs through, and they don't have to do it all, but they kind of oversee it and control it, for lack of a better word. And to your analogy earlier, like with the bulletin, I imagine this. Imagine if you look through a Target catalog, their latest mailer or whatever, and every person over a department got to create their own page. Like Jim is over electronics, and Jim's not good at graphic design, but he likes laser beams and computer font. So that's what the electronics page looks like. And, if every page was done that way, it would look awful. And that's how a lot of our bulletins and our websites end up looking, because we give everybody free reign to do their own thing. So I think it's going to be hard at first reining it in and creating some boundaries and some parameters, but I can tell you in the end, you're going to be much more successful at communications and helping people. Before we go any further, can you just kind of tell people more about Gloriam and about what you do? And tell us about your free class that you have through your website.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been doing Gloriam for about 8 years now. And so we're a marketing and creative agency that helps parishes and other Catholic businesses to market like Jesus would. And my goal really is to help you reach the people God has called you to reach while getting back to what he actually called you to a lot faster, right? So this is not adding more to your plate, right? It's just about taking the things that you're already doing and making them more effective and hopefully take you less time so that you can get back to your ministry work. Because I can't take over the confession line for you, but I can help you with this aspect to hopefully make your job a little bit easier. And as a former parish worker, I also know that you are very, very overworked and very underthanked. And so thank you for all the work that you're doing in case you haven't heard that today. But so how I come alongside parishes, so we do both a mix of practical work and consulting work. So we can come in, I do website design, email marketing, helping you set up, welcome sequences and welcome bags and things like that for your parishioners, coming up with new parish flyers and all those kinds of, print material needs that you have. But then I also do specifically communications consulting within parishes. So whether that's coming up with your overall plan, right? Your overall strategy, helping you come up with that, the mission for the church. But then also really diving deep into, we have this big event coming up and I don't know how to promote it, and really coming up with those strategies, again, to save you some time and make all that work hopefully more effective. But yes, as John mentioned, I have a free course on my website that goes through kind of the basics of everything you need to know to start out in Catholic marketing, particularly through the lens of Jesus. So it's a 7 video course where you go in and you kind of learn all these things about, like I mentioned before, that you'll learn about the marketing rule that made me cry in the beginning there, the first one that I learned about. But then all these ways that Jesus used marketing and the apostles used marketing to grow the early church, because if they were able to baptize like thousands of people in one day, I think maybe we should listen to what they were doing. And most of the things that they were doing was marketing. So you can find that on my website. I also have a whole bunch of other free resources specifically for parishes on my website. So yeah, feel free to explore and go through all of those. And I pray that they are helpful for your ministries.
Well, I love free stuff, and I think most pastors love free stuff, especially when it's something that can help grow and develop their team. And while I don't know many parishes that have a full-time communications person, I think more should. I think it should be more prioritized in our hiring as to who we can afford, because we are communications agencies. That's what we do. We communicate. But if you can't afford that, you can send your communications person, whoever they are, whether that be the receptionist or whoever, send them to Emily's website to go through this course for free and help them be even better at what they do. But you could also look at hiring someone like Emily part-time as a consultant, or just as a contractor part-time, to help come alongside that person at your parish and kind of educate and coach them. um, I just heard that the link is not working in the chat to the free class. So Ellen, if you could Google that and make sure there's a link in there, put a link in there on that. That'd be great. That was in our Q&A channel there. If you have any more questions for Emily as we go on, please drop them in the Q&A there. And thank you, Robert, for telling us about that. All right. You're a big fan of email marketing. I know everybody's like, we should be doing the TikTok and the Snapchat and all of that. And I'm like, well, if you didn't have an awful website to start with, I would say maybe, but let's start with the basics. Like, let's get you a great website. And then, but email marketing may seem kind of old school today, but you're a fan of it still. And tell us, let's talk about like how to have successful email communications from a parish. What are some keys to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, just with email marketing, I think most people think, oh, social media, that's the thing that we're going to use. But just looking at the stats on email marketing versus social media marketing, just purely conversion, and we're not talking about religious conversions here. We're talking about people taking an action, right? Typically on social media, you would see 1 to 3% of people take an action, right? Even a free action. On email, the lower end of that is 2 to 5%, and you can often see much higher than that, right? And now those numbers seem small, right? But it's more worth your time to be doing something that has a better conversion rate than something that doesn't. Now, I'm not saying don't use social media. Social media just has a different purpose to it. Social media is about reaching out to new people, right? And kind of growing camaraderie among the people that you do have. Email is about communicating mostly to the people you already have connected with and giving them the information that they need. So that's the first thing. Now, email marketing, to make it more effective, we really have to look at a couple of things. We have to look at how are you organizing the email? And even before that, what is your subject line, right? Most of the time when we send out an email as a parish, we're very focused on the what, right? So we were talking about what versus why before. This is a classic case where we'll say newsletter for date, right? That's typically what we would put in our subject lines. What I would rather you do instead is think about what is going to make somebody open this email. What is one thing in this email that I want every single person in our parish to know? So is that you have the parish festival coming up? Is that you have the ministry fair or CIA starting it? All the things, right? And is there a way that you can make it intriguing and make it something that, again, is speaking to the why, right? Why would somebody want to open this? Why would this help them? So we want to be thinking in terms of why in our subject line. You can always put, most email providers will have some sort of like preview text that you can put in, which is what comes after the subject line. That's a great place to put, Saint whoever's church newsletter for whatever date, right? But we really want to be trying to draw people in. If people aren't opening your email from their subject line, it doesn't matter how great the email is on the inside. And then on the inside, we want to make sure that it's really organized, right? So this isn't necessarily saying, hey, we're going to dump every single thing that would have been in the bulletin or on our website into an email every week. But you can actually fit a lot into an email newsletter as long as, and this is super important, very practical, making sure that you have a way for people to easily navigate through the email. So you can create in most email systems kind of, it's called anchor text, but essentially what you're doing is you're creating a table of contents up at the top that will link down to the various things you're going to talk about in the email. So if you have RCIA is starting, you have the moms group is starting up, you have a parish picnic, all those things, you can link to each one of those in the email and just say, inside this issue, here's your table of contents so people can go exactly to what they need to see. Now, of course, even better is to do some further segmentation, but that requires that we have more data than most parishes have about their parishioners. But at the very least, look at your subject lines and try to get a table of contents in there.
But it starts with doing something that gets people to open it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like that you're thinking about be creative in the subject line, say something that might make people curious.
Yeah,
Um, just give us, okay, will you give us a little freebie here?
sure.
Let's say I'm going to ask you to be really spontaneous here, work right
Okay.
off the top of your head. You're a pro at this, so I have total confidence that you're going to wow us big time. No pressure. Uh, uh, let's say we're sending out an email that we want people to know that about RCIA coming up
Mm-hmm.
in the fall. What maybe would you do as like a subject line for that, other than RCIA starts whatever date, right?
Yep. All right. Again, knowing the audience here is helpful, right? So I'm going to give you two. I'm going to say if you want to have your current parishioners inviting people to RCIA, because most of the people opening your emails are probably going to have all their sacraments, right? I would do something like 5 ways not to invite someone to church, right? We want to do something that's a little bit funny, right? And kind of give them the ways not to before we tell them how actually to invite people to church. Now, let's say that you were emailing and you knew this was going to people who were kind of curious about Catholicism, but weren't full parishioners, didn't have all their sacraments, whatever, right? From that perspective, then I would start to think about, okay, well, what is their holdup, right? Why are they not coming to church, right? And so you could even do, again, something funny of, 5 reasons why you shouldn't attend church, right? Something funny like that. Or we can get to the deeper pain of, this 1 hour a week solution to solve all the problems in your life, right? We want to be getting something that's intriguing, right? I love words. The The grammarian in me does not. But I love words like this is, right? Or phrases like this is. We're not actually telling them what this is. They have to open the email to find that out. Right. So throw all the grammar rules from your childhood out the window. Right. And we're going to get a little bit vague in our subject line to encourage them to open the email.
And that's so counterintuitive for a lot of people, right? We
Yeah.
we just want to jump right to the, and I'm guilty of that. I'm so guilty. All caps, webinar this Wednesday, right? Like that doesn't inspire anybody. So
Mm-hmm.
my apologies to everyone watching this who's gotten those. I'm gonna up the skill level on my subject line, thanks to Emily. So one other thing that I often hear parishes struggle with is how often should they send out emails to their main mailing list, and maybe even talk about segmenting your mailing list,
Mm-hmm.
what that could be like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say from the main mailing list, assuming that you have everybody in the parish, I would say 1 to 2 times a week, right? So you would probably have, again, if we're thinking about the email newsletter as bulletin part two or replacing your bulletin or something like that, we would want to do that once a week, right? And then if you have something big going on, right? So you have your parish mission is coming up that week, you're going to send a separate email that's just going to talk about the parish mission, right? The big parish-wide events. But then if you have some segmentation, right? So if you have the youth group or the moms group or, the religious ed group, right? All these groups, right, that you can have within your email system where you would send just to people who are interested in that topic or that group. I would say that again, we're looking at transactionally what is taking place. So for example, I run the youth group at our parish. So I send a weekly meeting reminder right before, the night before we're going to meet. And then, if we're going mini golfing or something like that, I'll send an email about that. Right. So again, even within the smaller groups, we're not sending multiple times a day. We're not even sending daily, right? But we're also not sending only once a month that they've forgotten that you exist, right? Once a week, twice a week tends to be the sweet spot.
All right, last question on the email stuff. I'll just say if you're not using some sort of email platform that where you have a lot more control over what you're doing, and you can actually get analytics, like you said, that can tell us this many people opened it, this many people clicked on the exact links. Like you can see who clicked on what exact links to follow up with them personally. Um, what would you recommend for an email solution like that? And what does it cost?
Yeah. So the most common, there's some that are church specific, right? So there's Flocknote, there's Diocesan, there's a couple of other ones that are specific for churches. And I really love those for churches because they have all the features that you would need, right? While taking away everything that you don't need, right? So it's really streamlined and able to use that. Now for those typically depend on how many people you have in, whether you're using their other like CRM or donation tools and all of that. So those are the two kind of church ones that get talked about the most. But then there's also just regular email marketing systems just for anyone. I really like MailerLite. It's a free email software that you can use up to 1,000 subscribers. And so you can go in and you can create automations, you can schedule, you can put people into different groups. That one's really great. And then there's also Flowdesk, which if you have a more, I'd say, elevated presence, right? Flowdesk has a lot of really creative email layouts. So they can be really great. And they are just a flat monthly fee. So you don't get charged more as you end up like having more subscribers. So if you have a parish of 5,000 emails that you're sending out to, Flowdesk could end up being actually more cost effective for you. And you just get kind of that more creative, kind of artsy, elegant layout than you might get with something with MailerLite, which is a bit more corporate feeling.
All right. Well, whatever you choose, I hope you'll research it a little bit, and I hope you use something, because when we communicate digitally, we just have such an incredible opportunity to get immediate feedback on how well we're doing. And you can play around with subject lines. Some of these will even let you A/B something, which means you could send the same email out to half your audience with one subject line and half your audience with a different subject line, and see which one performs better, which will educate you on how to do it better in the future. I said that was my last question about emails. I lied. Talk to us about when to send out emails,
Mhm.
and how to determine that.
Yeah. So again, you'll hear me talk about this often, especially if you take the course. I am very much into knowing your audience. I think if you don't know who you're talking to, none of the rest of your communications are going to work right. So knowing who you are trying to reach, knowing your parishioners really well is a key part of this, and knowing your purpose in the email. So for example, if you are trying to give people resources that they can use to prepare for Mass. So if along with your newsletter of what's coming up for the week, you also want to send them your Mass guide, or you want to link to a Bishop Barron video or something like that, right? You want to send that out before Mass, presumably either like Friday evening or Saturday morning, right? If, however, you want to use this as an extension of your Sunday, right? So you've talked about some things at the church and you're kind of using this as your digital bulletin, then maybe sending it after the weekend masses makes more sense. Sunday afternoon, Monday morning. Now, we also want to keep in mind, what is your audience typically doing? And specifically, your audience that's going to be opening your emails, right? So presumably, and this is going to be very stereotypical and painting a wide brush here, but typically your older population is not going to be the one that's going to be opening your emails, right? They might not even be on your email list. If you know that generally speaking, it's going to be your younger to middle-aged folks, think about what are they doing, right? On a Sunday evening, they're probably getting ready for bed, they're getting ready for the work week, they're not thinking about all of those things, right? And so maybe you want to be targeting this to send out at like 3 o'clock on a Sunday or on a Monday morning. But we don't necessarily want to be sending it at 9 o'clock in the morning when they're just getting into the office, right? So we want to start to put ourselves again in the mind of the person that we're sending to. When would they be most likely to open? And then it's just testing, right? You try it at Sunday at 3 for a bit and you're like, I didn't get great open rates there. You try it at 8 a.m. on Monday morning and now they go through the roof, right? So we try to figure out a little bit more about who we're sending to, and then we just test.
Yeah, I like that. And you can only test and you can only see how well you're doing if you're using some sort of email platform.
Yes.
I just think that's so important and well worth the investment. Talk to me about, let's just go through again something for the fall. I don't know if it's the fish fry or whatever, but just give us some pointers on promoting specifically like an event. It's
Mhm.
not a class, it's not a program, it's not a ministry, it's like an event. What would
Mhm.
be your pointers on that?
Yeah. Uh, Similar, we want to start with knowing who we're trying to reach, right? So not every event is going to reach every single person. And I know what you're thinking is that, but this event would help everyone at our parish. And that is wonderful, right? But I will go back to my biblical marketing examples that not even the apostles and not even Jesus tried to reach every single person that they could have, right? Because when we try to reach everyone, we reach no one, right? We get way too generalized, right? Because we're trying to make everyone happy.
Mhm.
And so what we want to do is we want to get really specific and know who this event is really meant for. Whose life is this going to transform the most? So once we know that information, then we can start to make a lot more decisions about where we're going to promote this, right? So most of you, I'm going to assume, have a bulletin, you have announcements after Mass, you have a place that you can put flyers on campus, you might have an email newsletter, you might have social media. There's a lot of different communication channels that you might have. And so for the most part, we tend to think, well, we're just going to put it up everywhere, right? But again, when you put something everywhere, the message starts to get a little bit diluted, right? Because everything is everywhere, right? And people are just glossing over, oh, this is the same page in the bulletin that I've seen the last 4 weeks, right? They don't notice that one thing is different. So what we want to do is figure out what are the communication channels that make the most sense for that audience. And then it's about coming up with the marketing message that speaks to the why and not the what. So yes, you're going to tell people that you're having a fish fry or you're having a ministry fair or whatever it might be. But we also want to think about, why would somebody do one of those things? Why is somebody coming to a fish fry? Well, in Lent, it's pretty obvious because you are not eating meat on Friday and you don't want to deal with the hassle of trying to make fish. So great, this is the place where you can go and do that, right? Something like a ministry fair, right? We can think through, well, why would somebody show up to something like this? It's probably because they want to deepen their faith. They want to get more involved in the parish. They want to give back and they want to find their community, right? And so we can hone in on one or multiple of those feelings, right? To then market to that, right? So instead of just saying, hey, come to the ministry fair, with the implication that you're going to try to get everybody's email address and sign them up for every ministry possible, right? Instead, we're going to look at that and we're going to say, you know what, people in our parish typically reach out. They typically join groups and ministries because they're looking to deepen their faith with a community. And so we're going to focus on that, you're going to come to this and you're going to find the community that's going to take you through 2025. What is the group that's going to help you to grow your faith in 2025? And that's what we're going to kind of make our marketing basis on. So we're going to figure out who we're trying to reach. We're then going to be able to figure out from there, what are the platforms that we prioritize? And then we come up with the marketing message based off of that particular group's why, which I promise you is going to be more universal than the generalized marketing of just we're having a ministry fair.
That's great. I mean, that was a great 1 minute of really valuable gems for people. I hope that people will take your class. We are so grateful for what you share with us today, Emily. You are brilliant. You're doing great work. You get the heart behind it. And I think that comes through. And I think when people are concerned about the term marketing or advertising or communications, I think they forget that you can do it with the heart behind it, what you want for people. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for joining us. And I hope we'll circle back in the future and learn some more from you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Shadon.